Welcome to FMRPG. We're here tonight to talk about something that should be talked about on another show called System Mastery. We're here to talk about Phoenix Command because someone made a terrible joke in the Discord channels, and that person was Mike. What up, Mike?
Yeah, that was me. Hi, I'm Mike. I'm in the Discord a lot, and geez, well, we'll get into it.
But Mike is also from the great show Darker Days Radio, so we'll be pimping that later as well. But if you're not listening to it, don't stop now. But after the show, go subscribe. And then we got Noland. I suckered Noland into this because he likes old games.
But this time, it's not my fault.
It is not. That was that was Phoenix Dawn Command.
Yeah, that one's my fault.
Was your fault. Oh, other than reading this game, how's everybody been doing?
Oh, pretty solid. Yeah, I've been working on some Imperial Navy breachers today, and you might see me clipping out some bits during the show if you're watching the YouTube. And yeah, gaming wise, been playing some D&D. Not too amped about that system though. So I've been thinking about, because my fiance wants to start up another group for some people. I've been thinking about the new Legend of the Five Rings. I got that book.
The one with the more esoteric dice. Is that?
Yeah, so I'd use the esoteric dice, but I'd probably use the setting from the new Adventures in Rokugan because it's slightly more. There's actual East Asian voices that had input into it, so it's a bit. The setting actually is a little bit more fixed than it was in 2017, and obviously better than the 90s version in hindsight.
Right. Well, we could that setting can only get better over time, as far as I can tell. So, and speaking of not liking Dungeons and Dragons, and I got my copy of Dungeon Caster from our good friend Christopher Gray in the mail.
Ooh.
So this is supposed to be a story game version of Dungeons and Dragons, and it's based off his Highcaster system, which is very story gamey. So I'm looking forward to reading through that, but it's supposed to be be able to directly go through here, and it was Creative Commons before it was cool. So, but about to wrap up Cyborg, I think, depending on how next Saturday goes. But for a minute, and then we might play Marvel superheroes from the 1980s.
Yeah, let's get some phase rip on. I'm game.
Yeah, I've suckered Noland into running that for me, I think. But
you were like, "Can you run this?" And I was like, "I think so." And then you asked me to help you generate a character last night. I was like, "I think I could do this cold without looking at the book."
Yeah.
Like, it's been a long time, but I played so much of that in high school.
Yeah, that should be a lot of fun. I know Mordant Crimson on the Discord, he went through and reviewed every single Marvel role-playing game in a post, and someone should screen cap that or something, because it was very detailed and very good. Well, he got a lot of love for Face Rip. He got a good review.
Yeah, well, we got him on an episode that is not released at the time of this recording, talking about why superhero games are awesome and maybe why they're not as popular as as every other form of superhero media. So look forward to that in the near future past, depending on when this drops. Days of Future Past. There we go. Reference. That's what people like, right? Speaking of, well, I don't think there are any references well, maybe there's some references in this game, but hoo boy, Phoenix Command, everybody.
Phoenix Command, everybody. And just to date this for the listeners, we're recording this on tax weekend in the United States, and I think that's extremely appropriate because this has all the charm of a tax form. Look up in table 7C.
Mike, how did you know about this game? Because I mentioned it to someone else at a game store, and he's like, "Why? Who would even know about that game, and why would you even bother?"
Well, geez, I don't know when I first heard about it, but I definitely. It could be from when I used to go into Wikipedia and click on the category RPGs and just read through every single thing that had a Wikipedia page and be like, oh yeah, okay. The Highlander fan game for World of Darkness. Oh, okay, that's cool.
Oh yeah,
that's
the Immortal, I think is what it was. Anyways, yeah.
Highlander the Gathering, I think was the original one, but there was another one for Chronicles of Darkness. I know a lot of weird stuff. Yeah. Oh man, what about like Omega 23 and then Phoenix Command. That sounds spicy. So it might have been from that, or it might have been even earlier, because I used to be on some pretty grognardy message boards for like Warhammer 40,000 second edition and like Rogue Trader. I think Rogue Trader Heresy was the one. Oh yeah, Legacy. Yeah, that's the one. War of Ages. Yeah, that's one where you can chop off people's heads and get some power. I saw some pretty interesting stuff about souls. But getting back to the main topic, so definitely it was sometime on the internet, basically. And it always kind of stuck in my mind. And I will actually also point out that I played a variation of Phoenix Command years and years ago because someone on Newgrounds, the Flash website back in the day, actually made a version of the Aliens board game which used this system. And I was able to play it in that way.
What? So the Aliens board game was used the Leading Edge, which is the name of the company that published this system, for an Aliens branded board game.
Yeah. It was pretty crunchy, but luckily it was on a computer when I was playing it, so it wasn't that bad. But don't worry, everyone. We're going to dive right in and just get into the insanity of this because the 80s were a different time.
Didn't Leading Edge also get the license for that one movie, Dracula movie, where he looks like Mozart back in the early 90s?
I really want to know Dracula.
Yeah, I really want to know if that uses the Phoenix Command system.
I don't know if that was Leading Edge or if it was West End Games. It could be either. But we'll have to look that up and confirm as we go along here.
That's that would be an interesting. I mean, obviously, a company like that getting random licenses. It's sort of like today. Like there's just these like that one Kickstarter that keeps pimping all the random licenses it gets, Pacific Rim and all this other stuff. And it's like, wait, but why would you do that in D20? Anyways.
Stargate, G.I. Joe, Power Rangers, Transformers. But anyway, let's just get into the punishment here because I know people want to know some more about Phoenix Command. So let's dive into this. And gosh, have we gotten ourselves into something. So Phoenix Command was originally published by Leading Edge Games in 1986 as a generic small arms combat system. And despite making a lot of allusions to role-playing games, it isn't one. Or is it? The book seems a little bit confused on the matter. But reading through, and maybe Noland, you can kind of confirm this or give your own opinion, it seemed like it was trying to achieve three things in this very slim tome, which was one, to create a hyper-realistic wargame simulator, create a narrative campaign system, and create a role-playing game or a system that could be bolted onto other existing RPG systems or settings.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's its stated goal. I think you're absolutely right there. But the notion that you could bolt this onto anything else is almost ludicrous. It's so detailed. How could you, it towards the end it says you might just use our incredibly baroque system for firing weapons, but then fall back to your own systems hit point system or something not have to roll on 10,000 tables after you've been hit. But the notion that you can plug this into something else, one thing that did occur to me was something incredibly fluffy might actually work. Like if you want to play like drama system as like the interpersonal drama between this platoon of, soldiers, and then use this as the resolution for non-dramatic scenes, then maybe something like that.
No.
I think it might actually even weirdly
No.
work. I think it might actually even weirdly work because drama system is always driving you to like have more dramatic scenes and avoid more procedural scenes. And they even have a terrible Ramen Laws even put a terrible like procedural resolution system in there because he wants it to be no fun, so that you keep having dramatic scenes, which are the fun kind. And I think Phoenix Command here would definitely be the terrible resolution system you would want to avoid and have another like, grim, night in the trenches with your band of brothers rather than have to deal with combat.
Yeah. That is a good way of looking at it. Instead of using whatever system Recon uses, for example, just stick this in and then you'll not want to get into a firefight. Definitely change the tack of the game.
Like you're good. It's like playing because this is a miniatures game. God damn, this is a miniatures game.
Yeah.
But like it's like playing like Blood Bowl or something. The further you can go without actually rolling the dice, the better you are. Like this, the further if you can just like move around and just never roll the dice, you're probably better off.
Right.
Oh, and the authors acknowledge that if you every so often they stop for a little tactical hint, and it's only like 2 or 3 paragraphs or whatever. But at one point they stop and say like, "I've got some tactical help for you in here in the basic game. And one of the good strategies you should have is don't get shot." Oh, thanks, game.
Okay, well, let's dive into the setting because the book really wants to focus on that hyper realism. All right, this is a simulationist realism game, and it gives it to you. So let's talk about it. It might be a little painful, but this is what people are here for. So we start off, it's any good RPG game does, even though this isn't an RPG, which is starting off with how you make your character. And stats in Phoenix Command range from 3 to 18, 3d6, just as Lord Gygas intended. These stats are strength, intelligence, will, health, and agility. So they kind of partially map to D&D, but also have a little bit of a variation there.
Well, they literally say we're not going to deal with charisma. Like, sorry, that's out of the scope of this. Like, we're not going to deal with anything out of combat. Like,
yeah, it has that line in there. Like, if there's, I think it says something. Well, it's in my notes somewhere else, but it says it talks about the role playing stats later, or it's like in a different section, and then you just don't even find them in the book.
Right. We just lost that section. It was not important anyway.
Yeah.
I will note here
we have to cut a page.
Yeah, I will note here that they're like super careful to like, model everything about firearms like super realistically. But of course, the only real way to model a human being is with 3d6. Like,
yeah,
an attribute from 0 to 18.
Yeah. If you look at their Living Steel game, which also uses this system, you generate a character by rolling 4d6, adding that to 48, and then dividing up those points between your 5 stats. So that's a little bit of an interesting way of doing it, I think. Anyway, let's get back to Phoenix Command, though. Next, you need to get your character's skill level, which ranges from 0 to 20. Where have I seen that before?
But there's more. But there's more because, first of all, that's not actually the number you use when you use your skill level. It's on a chart. You have to cross-reference your skill level with your skill something level to actually get some kind of like across. And then there's no system to determine what level you are other than the game master or the player just says what level they are.
Yeah, there's
That's
no.
not gonna
It doesn't come from your stats. This was wild to me. It doesn't come from your stats at all. And there's just like a thing. There's like a chart in there that says like, oh, a special forces team is at this skill level, and like a enlisted man is at this skill level, and like somebody who is basic firing arms training is at this skill level. Like, it doesn't say how to generate it, how to add it to your character. Either the GM just says it, or like.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Special Forces, which we think is like best of the best, their skill level is like 12. So, like, who's the 20 then? I mean, why do we even have this granularity in the system if we don't even use it?
Well, there's definitely a diminishing return on that chart. Once you get above a certain level, it's only like +1 extra to your roll or whatever. But there's like big jumps, and then it just like levels off about there. Yeah. So like it's a weird diminishing return thing that I'm like, okay, because I tried to figure out how to shoot somebody, and that was a mistake. But go ahead, continue, Mike. This is
Oh yeah, okay. So next up, we have rules for speed and encumbrance, just like any good RPG would have. And you need to cross-reference these values on a table with your strength and agility to find your base and maximum movement speeds. And these range from between 1 and 13. So you can move between 1 hex and 13. Actually, I'm sorry. I shouldn't say hex because the game has not told us that this is a hex game yet. So between 1 and 13 units at this point.
But it almost doesn't even make any sense that it's 1 to 13 units because said hexes, because the later when it tells you how to move is not directly mapped to your move speed.
Right. It's all pretty zany. Then we have the intelligence skill factor, which is determined by your skill factor plus your intelligence. And this is actually really your character's reaction value. I don't know why they called it intelligence skill factor. They really just want to make things more complicated.
They had to use the int stat somewhere, and this is it. Yeah, and like you're absolutely right. Like all this is your like twitch value or your reflex value. Intelligence never comes into your character into the combat system other than this. But this is the only thing intelligence feeds into. But yeah.
It's all pretty wacky. And why couldn't it just be your intelligence or just be the reaction? Let's say. Yeah. Why do we need this extra table just to calculate it? It was the 80s, man. It was the 80s. All right, now here we get like a really good one. Next, you need to calculate the knockout value, and this is a character's metric for when they go into shock from their injuries. And the equation for this is 0.5 times your character's will times your skill level. And we didn't really mention this before, but your skill level is actually short for gun combat skill level. So basically, the better you are at shooting, the more damage you can take before passing out. And I guess, this is the 1980s, so people were watching a lot of Schwarzenegger films, and that just makes perfect sense. That's just realism.
I mean, that makes it makes no sense, but it's also I find the idea of the knockout value to be really interesting.
Oh, it's great.
Like that's something that, because you're like often don't want to kill a character off a lot, but in this game they're just going to die left and right.
We'll get into it later, but I do find the health situation like and getting shot is as complicated as shooting. So we'll deal with that when we get to it. But I do find it a little bit interesting, like how it works.
But somehow you learn how to be knocked out less by getting better at shooting. Yeah, that's
there was some logic by the designers, but I don't know what it was. And they definitely did not take us aside to explain that one. Now we get to combat actions and other concepts. Here's a couple things to highlight. So combat takes place in 4 impulses each phase, and characters get a certain number of actions during each impulse. The number of actions depends on your maximum speed and your intelligence skill factor reaction. And basically you can get between 0 and 6 actions per impulse. Now, when you go back into the back of the book, the table just stops at 21 total actions, but you know from what we were saying before that you could actually get up to a total of 24. I guess they just ran out of space in this table and just hoped that no one would level up that high, basically.
Which is probably true. But the other part of this is weird is like, so the rounds are 2 seconds and there's 4 impulses, so they're half a second long. But then you get so many actions and you get into the place where you have uneven numbers of actions you can have in an impulse, which means you get into the place like in the second edition where you have 2/3 attacks.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there is a weird pattern to how they assign those. Like if you have an uneven number, so you have your total number of action you can do in a phase, which is 2 seconds, and those get more or less evenly distributed between the 4 half-second impulses. But when it comes to the fact that you've got a remainder and 1 left over, like the first time I think they put it in the first impulse and in the third impulse and then the fourth and then the second, I think. So you can extend that table indefinitely into the
I mean, I could figure it out, but it was just like, you guys just didn't complete the table.
Right.
That's fun. That's great.
They just stopped. Yeah.
Maybe you should have stopped a lot lower level on a lot of other stuff, and that would have been fine. Like 12, which is special forces, you just cut this whole game.
So the action economy here is weird, though, right? Since we're here talking about it, I want to So you can use your action counts, which you get, a certain number each impulse, but you can carry them over across impulses, right? So it may take 6 action counts for a SWAT guy to batter down a door, right? And a super fast dude, might be able to do that in 1 impulse. But a more typical guy may have to hold, has 2 actions per impulse, and he may have to hold that, keep doing the battering ram across 3 impulses to build up enough action count to get the door battered down, for instance. So that's kind of how that works. This also gets to aiming. Do we want to talk about aiming?
Yes, we want to talk about aiming. But first, before we get to aiming, I just want to talk about 2 things. One, that the charts are only ever printed once, and they're in the back of the book. They're not printed when you're reading through this. So you're constantly flipping back and forth in this book.
Oh, yeah.
It is not possible to read this book without your thumb in the back.
Right. You should. I mean, it was designed to be printed, but I'm reading it on a PDF because I wasn't going to waste the paper on this thing. But I didn't have enough scrap paper laying around. But the action table for, you have all these micro actions you're doing, but it's rather limited in what its scope is. So anything outside the scope of this is going to be an argument between you and the game master as to how many action segments it takes, how many actions it takes to do something. Because that's what it says. It says to be determined between the players and the referee. And it's well, this is the 1980s, so that's probably going to end some friendships when you have to take 10 actions instead of 5 to do whatever you needed to do that turn.
Right.
But getting into aiming, because you can aim for every action and 6 or 8 actions depending on what weapon you're using is how many. I think it's mostly 6 by the look of it, because there's 20 page. Nope, 9, 10. Okay.
Yeah, you can aim at you can keep on aiming, man. The more segments you keep aiming, the more bonuses you stack up. There's a limit to it, but it's a lot. So fun trick question. How many actions does it take to actually pull the trigger and fire your weapon in this game? Trick question. 0. You are it is implied that you fire at the end of this impulse in which you quit aiming.
Interesting. Huh. I didn't catch that. That went above my head.
That you can keep aiming and keep aiming and keep aiming, and the book says, you may have declared that you're going to aim for like 6, action counts. But then you see your buddy get shot and whatever, and you're like, fuck it, I'm going now. And like, you've only got 3 counts, so you can like stop and just fire then, right?
Well, I did see that you can fire whenever you want, depending on, but you can stop. But I didn't realize that it didn't count as an action.
Yeah, the actual pulling the trigger is free. And the action,
I don't mind that, actually. That's okay. So your
it's
basic
a weird
action,
choice, but it's interesting.
Your basic action is to aim then, so there's a minimum of 1 action of aiming.
Well, but I assume that's your firing.
Aim?
That's where you start with your on. So to fire a weapon in this game is madness. Let me first say that, okay? Because I spent like a good chunk of time of my life, a couple more gray hairs in my beard, trying to figure this out. And I was like, oh, well, it's just your skill level and get cross-referenced with your range. Well, no, because it's the skill level. You go to the skill, you have to find the skill level chart, and that tells you what your modifier is to what your aim is. That then you cross-reference that with your range. So you're like, oh, I'm trying to fire this pistol at this distance. Well, that pistol has a specific, if you just snapshot it, which is like the one aim line, I think. Hell, if I remember, it's like, it's really terrible. And then your skill modifies you down so many levels in that chart. And then you go across to where your range is at. Right. So, and I found that most shots were impossible. Like even trying to shoot something at 2 yards was like an 80% chance on most things at like relatively low levels.
Yeah. And later you'll get later they'll tell you how to adjust that up and down based on how much cover your opponent has and whether they're standing or kneeling or laying prone,
or whether you're standing, kneeling, or laying prone,
and whether you're moving and whether they're moving. All these adjust you up and down in this giant table of 2 hit, right? This is, table 2A odds of hitting, right? Which is the master kind of table. And there's a whole diagonal up at the top where you just miss, and there's a whole diagonal bottom where your shot accuracy gets high enough and you just hit, right? But yeah, then there's some lines in the middle then there's a band in the middle where you get some percentage from between like 1% and 96% or whatever, 98, 99%, where you can take a shot, right? And you actually need to roll, right?
Well, it's sort of it's hilariously, I think it's emulating more of a Schwarzenegger movie than it is real life in some places, because I just was like, when I was doing the calculation, I was like, oh, I'm just a militia guy. So I'm a level 1 dude, which means I get a +5 to my roll. And I'm just trying to make a snapshot at a guy with my 1911 pistol. Mm-hmm. And that's a start at -18, and then I go up 5. Add 5 to that, and I get down to -13. But then there's no -13 line, so it goes to -12, which is nice of them to round up instead of down in this situation, as far as I could tell. I mean, it could be the other way, but that's what I read into their as a terrible writing. And then you go across over, I can't shoot it more than 20 yards. So then I got to like 20 hexes, but I got to, anyway.
Because you're using a handgun, right?
Right. So I have
1911.
I have a 1% chance of hitting a dude out there at what I would think is the mostly what you would, most ranges are about that long.
Right.
Most
Whereas
gun
they
ranges
whereas like the enormous weapons chart in the back is like, how many different types of M16s and AKs can we list? Like all the subvariants. Like, and that's what it's assuming you're
20
firing.
pages. Yeah. 20 pages of this book are just weapon charts.
Yeah. It's definitely it definitely thinks you're infantrymen with, assault rifle, like kind of situation.
They saw the Palladium like arms and guns gun. They're like, oh, we can do this better.
Oh yeah,
we could totally do this better. And
we're so much more realistic.
Yeah,
that's why we got this.
The guns are more complicated than your character.
They have a similar number of attributes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they also have a subchart. There's similar attributes, and then there's a subchart you've got to go into if you're going to try and penetrate armor. There's a whole subchart for that.
We're not to penetration yet. This book is obsessed with penetration.
It's quite true. It's quite true, but not just penetration, Noland. It's obsessed with length in inches.
Yep.
The weight, probably the girth of the gun.
Yep.
Reload time, rate of fire, knockdown power, all those aiming modifiers we were mentioning. Sustained fire.
Whether you're standing or kneeling.
Yep. And let us not confuse penetration with effective penetration. These are different things. Like never the two shall meet.
Or blunt penetration, which is also a thing.
Yep. We got minimum fire arc in hexes, just in case you decide to spray and pray, that sort of thing. Accuracy of the gun, accuracy of the ammunition, time of flight of the projectile.
Yeah, because you definitely have to pick whether you're firing, armor piercing or like that makes a big difference in the armor. Yeah, all those different types of ammunition make a big difference in how you die.
Hollow points, which I think are banned by the Geneva Convention, but hey, war crimes are okay in an RPG, right? Oh, I'm sorry, this is a small arms combat simulator.
Well, if you can buy them on the street, then they're going to put, because it was a big deal in the 80s, right? Those were just hitting the American market, really.
Yeah.
So
no, that's a good point. They probably weren't banned at that point. These gun stat blocks are actually, I counted it, more complicated, more attributes than the character sheet. So,
nice.
And you're going to have multiple of them. So have fun with that. You could definitely need to photocopy this book back in the 80s.
Oh yeah, this is like you're basically need to have like 6 or 8 copies of this photocopied so you can like cut out all the stat blocks and put them on your character sheet.
Yeah. So now the book at this point tells us that we're ready to play the game because we only made it to page 8 so far. We kind of talked about the combat system and the aiming and stuff. So we'll just kind of give the Cliff Notes discussion from here, because really there's just 2 main actions, which is move and shoot. Actually, I don't even remember if I saw this. Is there melee combat of any kind in this?
No, I was about to say there's 50 pages in here. They're all about weapons and all about combat and whatever. There is not one sentence on how your special forces dude can slit a guy's throat. It's not possible.
Or stab a guy with a bayonet mounted to your rifle. Like literally, it was most of the scenarios these guys would have been recreating from even Vietnam would have had guys like putting bayonets on the end of their guns, like fighting in the jungle. Like
just literally nothing in here about melee. Like anything that isn't firearms is not fucking modeled in the most realistic system in the world.
All right, okay.
I'm sure there's an extension for it. I'm sure there
were probably more books than this, but
I'm sure there's a splat book that extends it. But in this core book here, no, there's no way to stab a guy.
Well, Aliens had a variant, so it must have melee combat in that, or is it just if the alien reaches you, you're gone?
I don't.
Yeah,
it's surely not in this game. Surely you have to determine which part of your liver is damaged by the alien.
Because the where you're hit charts is a piece right almost out of Hackmaster. Like it's like 2 or 3 pages, and it's very detailed as to what part of what gland you're actually hitting somebody in. Very, very obsessed with glands, I think. So,
all right, are we talking about hit location and effective penetration and
Nolan, take it away.
Go for it.
Are we to this part?
Yeah, we're to this part. Go for it.
All right. So, you've hit a guy, maybe, right? You hit a guy, right? You've landed a bullet roughly on target. At this point, you have to make a roll as to whether or not it's like a glancing blow or a penetrating blow, right? And there are like 10 different weapon damage classes, and there's all different. So this all goes, the master table for this is table 6A, hit location and damage. And this is a 12-point like table.
He's showing it on screen.
On screen.
There's no way you could actually read it, even in 4K.
This is a 12-point chart table that covers 2 8.5 by 11 like pages completely, like from top to bottom. Like there are 10 damage classes of weapons. You have to once you have determined your effective armor penetration, right? What you do that is you get their armor protection factor, and you make a roll to see how penetrating your shot is, and that's just 0 to 9. And the difference in here can be this roll is like the single most important thing. Like this roll is unbelievably the amount of the swinginess of this damage is madness. Because if you have a 0 and it's like a glancing roll, this is chart 6D, right? Yeah, you can go from very minimal to incredible, huge amounts of damage. And I do think this damage thing is like somewhat interesting. So I'm going to get into this a little bit. So you determine then your effective penetration based on what their armor's protection factor is and this roll here. And once you get the effective penetration, you then need to figure out where they were hit. And of course, there's different places they can be hit depending on whether they're hiding behind cover of some kind, in which case they can only be hit in like the head and the shoulders and the arms as they're shooting out behind cover. Or if they're out in the open, you can hit them in the liver or the pelvis or whatever.
The rib in front of your liver. There's literally a rib on every other line of this thing for
yes.
your chest. So your rib couldn't save your ass, apparently.
Yes. You're hitting the lung, but it hits the rib. Like, it makes a big difference. Or you're hitting the liver, but it hits a rib. Like, it matters a lot. And the damage here is kind of madness. So there is that knockout factor from before, where if you take a certain amount of damage, you are going to be knocked unconscious. You are going to go into shock or something. But the amount of damage you can take here ranges from like 1 or 2 points to, I think there's a prefix here for millions of damage, right? If you look at table 6A, you can take millions of damage.
Well, you don't really have that much health to start with.
That's the interesting part. You don't die by running out of health in this game. That's weird. What happens is you take a buttload of damage and you look it up in another table. And what this table tells you then is how long you have until you have to make your death check and what your death check will be. Right? And there's various quality of care, right? Everything from your buddy doing CPR in the field to like a level 5 trauma surgery center, right? Like all these levels of care, to a field hospital or a civilian hospital, all the way up to a level 5 trauma center, right? And so you take this damage, you've taken like 1 million damage, and you're going to die in like 6 impulses. But then your buddy gives you CPR, So now you move over to the table, over the column of the table, where you're receiving CPR. So now you're going to die in 30 minutes. You're going to have to make your death check in 30 minutes because your buddy is giving you CPR and he can keep you alive for 30 minutes. But then they get you to a field hospital. So now you get to wait, 6 hours until you make your death check. And the odds on your death check are much better because you're receiving field hospital. You're basically at the MASH center, right? And that's an old person reference. But you're receiving some kind of actual medical care, so your death save is much, much higher. But whenever the time whatever level of care you're receiving at the time, when the time runs out for your death check, right? And it doesn't reset when you get a new type of care. It's always from the impulse when your buddy started first, when you first took the bullet, right? But each kind of level of care can stretch that out, and each level of care improves your odds of making your death check. So yeah, even if you have take 1 million points of damage, that just means you're going to die in a few half seconds, right? It doesn't mean you're dead. There's no amount of damage you can take where you're just dead. You have to fail a death check, and you get to drag it out by receiving better and better levels of care. But that's how that works. And it's a little bit crazy, but it is interesting.
Yeah, it certainly is. In a role-playing game sense, that is pretty neat because it really could ramp up the drama. And I guess in a even in a tactical war game, if you are attached to the characters for some reason, maybe you're doing that narrative campaign we were talking about, then you're going to want to get them out of there, extract them, which could make things definitely really interesting. Noland, one thing you brought up, which I think is really neat, is that that knockdown value, because I actually think it's pretty neat that you get hit by some sort of an object, and then there is a comparison to your knockdown score that you have between the knockdown effect of the weapon, and then you see, does your character go down or not? And it's a probability, right? If you get hit by a grenade launcher round, 40 millimeter, I think is what it is, that might actually not knock you down. There's a 98% chance that'll knock you down, but it might not. And even if you're the most, badass dude with the highest will score, the best, gun value, there's still a slight chance that even just a, round from a pistol or something, or a zip gun, could actually knock you down, just because it gets you in just the right way. I think that's really neat. But of course, they ruin it because they make you do this whole calculation, and then you check to see if you take damage. And then if you take damage, right, if you're about to die, you're knocked down anyway. So it should really be flipped around. But
right. Yeah, that's definitely true. And it does mean that even the most glancing of wound, you have to be worried about getting shot no matter what, because you're always going to roll on, are you, going into shock, even from a what is basically a flesh wound, even a 5-point little scrape could take you out of the combat, right? Because the combat with your buddies going around you is going on in half-second intervals. So if you go into shock, you are effectively out, right? This whole combat, could take 10 or 20 seconds, and you are not coming back from shock in 10 or 20 seconds.
Well, which is why this is more of a miniatures game where you should be playing it with multiple characters under each person's control, because you're going to lose the first person one impulse in as he steps around the corner and gets blasted, and you use that as a distraction to get to the next piece of cover, right? And you point out rightly a little later on in your notes that it sort of harkens back to a little bit like Kriegspiel or some of the early stuff that Gygax was doing with chainmail, that really is a refereed war game. This is not there's no role playing in it unless you want to like pretend with your and go through your hospital calculations after the game. I almost guarantee you almost no one ever did the hospital calculations and just went, we got new privates in.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh, well, yeah, they probably restarted, but yeah, I mean, yeah, who wants to find out, whether or not the wound is disabling to my liver, so my liver never works again, or like.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. So Nolan, that was an awesome summary right there. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we really need to go over armor. It just makes you a bit more resilient. It's complicated, and of course, you gotta have your body armor.
It computes that effective penetration, right? The armor's there because you need to compute the effective penetration to figure out how many hundreds of thousands of points of damage you're going to take.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you have your body armor, you have your helmet armor, and then your visor armor. I like that they made that very specific.
Those are very different, right? Yeah, because when you compute the armor factor for the effective penetration, like it matters whether it hits you in your flak jacket or in your visor. Like those are different.
Yeah. Realism. So after that, in the combat section, we got a couple other things. Automatic fire can help you land multiple hits. That's one way of doing it. So that's the way they went with it. And then you get to all the advanced rules. I don't know if Nolan, you want to really talk about these, but we have stuff like bullet drop, shotguns, shotguns, which you need to calculate the individual number of pellets that hit.
Yes,
that's great.
Yes, you determine whether the shotgun pattern lands on your target and then how many pellets hit. And the table is like super confusing because most of it is in percentages, but then up the upper top it gets into very small numbers, which are like 2-star, which means if you are at this level, you are guaranteed to hit them with 2 pellets. And you might look at that table and think, why do I shot even better? Why do I have only a 2% chance? No, that's not a 2% chance. That's at this level, you are guaranteed to have hit them with 2 pellets out of your shotgun blast. So yeah, you overlay the shotgun blast on the character and you determine either the odds of hitting them with at least 1 pellet or how many pellets. And then the game, of course, suggests, well, if you're weak, you might just assume all the pellets hit the same body location, but real simulationists will roll individually on every body part for which pellet. Yes. Whether the one hits your rib or your liver or your like pelvis, or you got to roll those pellets individually if you're a true fan.
For the discerning gamer.
Yeah, exactly.
I need a drink.
Okay. RBK, you keep drinking. I'll keep talking. We got the rules for grenades, because obviously we needed that one. There's even more complex accuracy rules, which I didn't bother to read. And then at the very end, you get rules for the use of non-blocking cover, like human shields. So
because
non-blocking cover also covers hiding behind cardboard or hiding behind a car door, right? And then they, talk about how much armor value a car door is versus plaster. Of course, the table doesn't include drywall, which would be the most common thing for anyone to be behind.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That would be non-blocking cover. But yes, you are potentially, when you're hiding behind non-blocking cover, it is not just that you get hit in the head and the arm and the shoulder where you were shooting out from behind cover. You may be hit at any part of your body because the cover will be there. But of course, the cover will, of course, add an armor factor. If they shoot through the car door and hit you, then it increases your armor factor because the car door slowed the bullet before it hit you. Very, very, very important information here. Very critical to playing the game.
Yeah.
Make sure you can be hit in all the right parts. Yes. Which is a weird case because in that part, like maybe the adversary doesn't want a heart shot because that means the heart shot is going to add the car door's armor factor to. Yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, not
Yeah.
really interesting.
Well, I can see at least some strategy to it. Like, oh, okay, they're behind the car door, but if you don't shoot him in the chest, but if you could do a called shot for the head, oh man, called shot in their ear.
The called shots are weird. I didn't completely grasp it.
Yeah, I was going to ask because I didn't read that part. So that, I mean, yeah, I guess it makes sense. You can be like, try to aim for a thing, and I'm sure
it looks like you can try and aim for a thing, and then you prefer what I understood of how it worked, and it was complicated, was that when you try and aim for, say, the head or whatever, then you get a higher chance to hit the head, but you also get a higher chance to like hit the shoulder and neck, and like it focuses your fire. It makes your fire more difficult, and also kind of focuses the range at which you can miss. Right, that you'll miss on a nearby organ. And yeah, it was not entirely clear to me how this worked, but that seemed to be the gist of it.
I feel like that's how it works in BattleTech too, when you have called shots.
Yeah.
It just like focuses it more in that area. So if you're called shot on the head, you're probably not going to hit their legs, or it's much less likely.
But this thing is only 32 pages long.
Well, we're only at 32 pages for the main rules. This one we get into that 20 pages of guns.
Oh,
well, I know, but
because every gun is a character sheet. Yeah, like
should have little wigs for the guns, little like mustaches and wigs for the guns, so you can make them characters. Give them all cool names.
Oh, I forgot. We're in the advanced things. I do want to point out that in the advanced things, there's definitely 3.5 pages of charts about hearing sound, starting on page 44.
Oh God, yeah. I sort of intentionally forgot that existed.
Whether or not you can hear a sound, given the amount of the bass loudness and level around you, like if there's a bunch of automatic weapon fire going around you, you're unlikely to hear somebody racking a firearm. We also learn that racking a weapon is about as loud as opening a Velcro pocket. Those are similar loudness.
Okay. Sure.
But it's very realistic. I mean, like
I don't think that's actually true, because I think
really. I mean, this game is very realistic in the things that the authors have thought about. Things they haven't thought about, it's madness.
Well, they also have like a rule in the advanced one that drew my eye. That was it was basically a hero going out as a hero. There was like hey, you're down and out, but you're doing something cool, so we're gonna let you do the cool thing and then die.
Ah, yes, the hero rule, yeah.
Which I was like, well, wow, that's I've seen that many places, but I didn't expect to find it here.
Right, that's true. Yeah, there's definitely a chart in the advanced rules about how many impulses or how many action counts it takes you to spot a guy holding still in an empty field, because that's definitely harder than spotting a guy moving in an empty field. These are, target acquisition, and the advanced rules are madness. You mentioned the grenade rules earlier. It's what you would expect. In the basic rules, it just talks about the concussive damage of a grenade or so forth. In the advanced rules, of course, you get working out how far away you are and how much shrapnel you'll hit, and like what the shrapnel is similar to the shotgun pellets in terms of what the spread pattern is, and if you're going to get definitely one, or maybe only only a certain percent chance of getting one, or and the chart for how far you are from the explosive begins with you are in contact with the explosive, and goes up to, from there it's you're in the same hex as the explosive, and then the further you are away, the less likely you are to take it. And the advanced rules, of course, separate out the concussive damage of the blast of the explosion versus the shrapnel of the explosion. You have to compute those individually, and of course the shrapnel has a location hit on your body which is different, and you need to compute it separately. And if it hits you in the liver, that's more damage than if it hits you in the leg. And yes, of course,
Anyways, well, I think that's enough of that.
Is this enough?
That's enough.
We don't talk about the sample adventure.
Okay, you can use your wrap up time to talk about the sample adventures.
There's a couple of scenarios in the back. They are straight up war games setups. They are in no way role playing games. The sample adventure 1 provides no context at all for what's going on, but you eventually learn. It says the Soviets are crossing into Germany across the Rhine, and you eventually realize that you're playing NATO, so it definitely isn't World War II. This is definitely a 1980s, end of the world, Soviets rolling into West Germany kind of situation. And yeah, your dudes are native, and it describes. It gives you, a starter map for where all your dudes are, and sets up your dudes in a very advantageous situation where they can crossfire across the enemies. It describes it as a turkey shoot for the players to learn how to kill dudes. Cool story. And it says the demo adventure here, the Soviets will keep coming for 60 phases until they decide to go back and retreat.
So
just for the utter madness that is this 60 phases, on average, you'll say, there's definitely 4 impulses per phase.
Right.
The scenario plays up to 8 players, and it says there are 48 Soviets on the other side of the bridge. So 60 phases, 4 impulses, and 56 combatants in this scenario. Fortunately, thank God, everyone on average gets only 1 combat action per impulse. They're all at about speed 4, so they get about 1 combat action per impulse. With a few exceptions, like the NATO commander has a few extra, blah, blah, blah. But so on average, there'll be 13,440 combat actions to resolve in order to complete this scenario, this intro scenario. So that's a thing that happened.
Yeah. By my calculations, assuming 2 minutes per combat action, it would take you about 7.5 hours to do the scenario.
Yeah, it says diehards may, at their choice, continue fighting it out after the 60 phases if they wish. Diehards, the people who got past phase 20 are diehards. This is madness. The sample adventure 2 is a SWAT team busting up a drug den, basically. And there we learn, it's what you'd expect for cops or whatever. I won't go into it too much, but I will just quote a brief thing here that tells you how this game thinks about this. For a police officer to tell a suspect freeze costs 2 action counts. Once he is frozen, it takes 3 action counts to tell him to drop his weapon and for him to comply. At this point, he can be searched and handcuffed, but that will be essentially forever. To move a prisoner at gunpoint takes 4 action counts per hex, but allows the officer to remove a prisoner from the building.
May I also quote, because, the thing that kept me flipping through this book were the terrible margin quotes, because there's no actual art in this book other than sketches of guns.
Oh my God, so many drawings of guns.
But there's no art, but there is margins in here. But there's sort of the implied setting from the margin quotes of a cop, a singing bandit, and a bunch of army dudes that I think are all talking to each other. And one of the quotes is, blam, blam, stop, blam, police, blam. And then eventually the officer is an ex-officer.
Yeah.
And then he's just himself. Like, so there's
it's funny because the cop
gets
shot some
promoted.
guy without announcing himself. See, that's comedy in this game. That's
well, and then it says one of his next quote is, "Oops, ex-officer Axley," and then it's just Axley, the next quote. So like,
that page actually includes the bit where he uses a shotgun with a hostage, and then he's an ex-officer all of a sudden.
yeah, they're like B movie terrible quotes that I don't think, except for maybe the Three Musketeers, no one is going to know who else this is. So
yeah, it's
not great.
It's something. Yeah. The 80s were a weird time, and we just went in a time machine back to them. I think I just want to bring up those last two things that I mentioned before, those other two goals. The narrative campaign system where you have two players controlling a team each, and then you have like a narrator or judge or DM kind of watching everything. That's what Nolan was really talking about with the scenarios in the back. And then there's kind of an idea maybe you could link together scenarios and like watch your characters do battles and that kind of stuff, which harkens back, as RBK said, to like older wargaming scenarios from the very early days, just before RPGs became a thing. So that's interesting. It also really reminded me of Inquisitor as I was reading through this, because I was like, oh yeah, a lot of these rules are covered in Inquisitor, but are a lot simpler.
That would be funny if they had just they said, oh, we can just make this simpler for our game. That would be hilarious if that was the secret history of Inquisitor. But
yeah, Gav Thorpe is really a huge fan of Phoenix Command, and that's why we got Inquisitor. You heard it here first. That is not a rumor, that's a fact. And then it also talks about making this a mod for a role-playing game. We kind of alluded to this before. It says a couple of places that maybe you can combine this with a role-playing game, and maybe get some more realism and granularity with your combat system. I don't want to do the cop-out of saying like, oh, I'd never do that. Especially because we actually learned in preparing for this episode that Petri from Finland, there's actually a convention where they've been using Phoenix Command to do a Vietnam War scenario for the past like 20 years or something. So people do use this, and there are some fans out there. This is the third edition that we were reading, so
I think there is a
people
fourth
bought
edition.
the first. Oh my gosh!
There is
the fourth. I was going to make a joke that the fourth edition was Phoenix Dawn Commands. They accidentally bought the license, and they're like, "How are we going to make this work? I don't know. Make it fantasy."
So 20 years, they're in what phase 100 maybe?
Yeah,
exactly. Something like that. Something like that. But if you really wanted some really granular combat systems for resolutions, I mean, your options are kind of limited for what you can combine this with, because you can only really use modern guns unless you want to, start standing up plasma rifles and other things. But yeah, I was mentioning Recon before. If you don't want to use the Palladium derivative system that has, you could go with Phoenix Command. Of course, that's Vietnam themed again. Twilight 2000 obviously has its new system and an updated setting, but the granularity of this actually isn't that much worse than Twilight 2000 from back in the day, like version 1 and version 2. So if you wanted to use it for that or Merc 2000s, I guess you could. Oh, but I do like Nolan's idea of like putting this in as like a punishment. If you decide to do combat, like, all right.
So another place you might use combat as a punishment, right, is Cthulhu kind of universe where you fight the ancient evil, and like, yeah, that was hubris on your part, right? Like to decide to fight the ancient evil. So reading through this, I was like, this might not be insane to link into Delta Green or similar. Like,
okay. It actually, I mean, my character just died jumping off a train in Delta Green. So it does. I mean, I don't think it would work. It would be too much, but
obviously this game is too much, but yes.
But yeah, I think my answer is probably like microscope or something dumb like that. Like I know Nolan said drama system, but like, okay, we're gonna fight a war scene out, and we're gonna see who wins this war based on this one war game. But I always thought that the version of this same thing that I always thought would have been fun, actually fun, would be like Edge of the Empire, but we use X-wing for the space battles.
Right.
Like that sounds fun to me because X-wing is a fun game to me.
Yeah, and that's what MechWarrior used to do back in the day. The second you had your role-playing characters, but then as soon as you got into your mechs and did combat, we just switch over to BattleTech. So that works for some games.
I think your answer of Twilight 2000 might be the perfect answer.
Yeah,
it's the only answer that actually I think works. But
yeah, maybe taking some of the damage ideas and using that in Twilight 2000, which is already really deadly in the early versions of it, but the medical help issue, because resources are so limited, I think that could be kind of interesting to use. But it already has a lot of very similar systems, like the reaction system in this or skill intelligence level is similar to coolness in Twilight 2000 and other such things. So it already has a lot of the same stuff in it, just a little bit simpler. And I guess if you wanted to just cherry pick a couple of systems just to make things even more granular or zest it up a little bit, I guess you could do that. But I would be very curious to hear about if anyone that listens to Full Metal RPG has had any experience with this game and has maybe taken anything from it or used anything.
Absolutely. Email me at fullmetalrpgbiz@gmail.com or come on the Discord and just drop a story about this game, because I will definitely read the entire story, barring if you get too deep in the weeds about the game, but the actual system. But I'm interested to see if you actually used it anywhere. Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
But thank you very much, Mike, for making a terrible joke and then us losing some sanity reading this thing.
Yep. I'm sorry, everyone.
But I want you to, we're going to ask you the last question. So I asked the patrons to submit a bunch of questions, random RPG questions. Mostly Morden Crimson wrote most of this chart, but we've got some other people in here ask some questions. So go ahead and roll a d20.
Okay. I got an 11.
Okay. When you think about the best experiences you've had playing, what did the GM or other players do to make them so great? What lessons did you take from that experience and have that change the way you play or run games?
Okay, so one time I was doing a demo of Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition at PAX Unplugged. This is about 2 years ago. And these people just come in and was like late at night doing a demo game. And they're like, well, can we just get like a 2-hour game or something? So I was like, really just like, I had to throw my entire adventure out the window and basically just figure things out. But as they were doing that, I came up with a really good scene where, we're doing tabletop, but they're interrogating a guy that they just captured. I think it's a vampire or something. And we basically just said, hey, let's just LARP this in the corner. And I was just like in the corner in the chair and everyone's standing around me, just like pretty much interrogating me for the information. I think that kind of usage of LARP and not being afraid of you doing that can really just draw people in. And that was one of the strongest RPG adventures I've ever run, even though I had 0 things prepared for it. So I think that kind of interface between LARP and tabletop is pretty rad.
Well, and also the LARPing probably wouldn't have gone as far as the tabletop might have gone, where, instruments could come out or some other terrible X card worthy stuff could happen.
Good point.
Where you're LARPing such a situation, you're like, no, I'm here as the person. Like it's not the GM. Like I'm up here as a person. You need to treat me as such. And in Vampire, it can get pretty crazy, right? So I think that is an interesting situation that you could reapply in other goes. So
yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even consider that, but yeah, cool.
Yeah, that's a very good answer to the last question. Yeah. So all right. we've had a time tonight. I think everybody can agree that. And we all need to thank Mike for the terrible joke he made, and that we've now made an episode based upon, by going to Linktree/Darker Days Radio, and maybe checking out Darker Days Radio, because they have less esoteric things that are actually more interesting than this game.
Indeed, yeah. So Dark Days Radio is a horror role-playing game podcast. We used to do so much with Vampire, World of Darkness, Chronicles of Darkness. Now we talk about Warhammer a lot. Also doing some War Machine stuff because Mark IV just came out. So if you're interested in any of those kinds of topics, definitely check it out. And we also do some kind of spooky news, secret frequencies sometimes, which is a lot of fun. So really appreciate anyone that wants to come over and listen, because I know there's a lot of cross-pollination between FMRPG folks and Dark Days Radio. So I think by our forces combined, we can make an awesome community and really enhance RPGs. And thank you, RBK and Noland, for joining me on this ridiculous journey that we just had.
Certainly was ridiculous.
Definitely check them out.
Yeah. Also, I want to thank the patrons. You keep us doing weird stuff, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your listening to me ask weird questions in the patron channel on Discord, which is the benefit of becoming a patron, is you get to ask me weird questions, or I will listen to you because you are effectively the boss of this show, where you give me money to dance like a puppet. So you get to ask me weird questions. So bring it on. Full Metal at patreon.com/fullmetalrpg, or just go to our Linktree /fullmetalrpg, or Linktree fullmetalrpg, aka fullmetalrpg.com. Thanks everybody. Good night.
Enjoy your lookup tables.
Rah.